there is a belief that houses have memories. We like to think of them as inanimate objects: wood, glass, stucco, concrete. We treat them as containers for our lives. We buy them, we paint them, we fill them with furniture. And when we leave, we assume the house resets. We assume the slate is wiped clean for the next owner. But what if it isn't? What if a house is not just a container but a witness? What if the walls absorb the energy of the people living inside them? And what happens when that energy is so violent, so dark, and so sudden that the house simply stops? In the hills of Los Angeles, there is a neighborhood called Los Feliz. It is a place of wealth. A place of winding roads, towering palm trees, and Spanish Revival mansions that look down upon the city like kings. It is a place where the American dream goes to live. But on a specific street, Glendower Place, there sits a property that became something else entirely. It became a monument to a nightmare. For 50 years, this house stood silent, while the rest of Los Angeles changed, while we went from black and white television to the internet, while cars changed shape, while wars began and ended. This house stayed frozen. If you walked up the driveway in the year 2000 or 2010 and peered through the dusty, grimy windows, you would see a world that no longer existed. You would see a television set from 1959. You would see Christmas presents, wrapped in vintage paper, sitting under a tree that had been dead for decades. This is not a story about a haunted house in the traditional sense. There are no sheeted ghosts here. There are no demons hiding in the closet. The horror of 2475 Glendower Place is much colder and much more human. This is the story of a perfect family, a successful man, and the night that time stopped forever. Welcome to the Los Feliz Murder Mansion. To understand the death of the house, we first have to understand the life of the man who ruled it. His name was Dr. Harold Perelson. On paper, Harold was the man everyone wanted to be. In 1959, he was 50 years old. He was a successful physician, a cardiologist with a sharp mind and steady hands. He was an inventor, a man who tinkered with medical patents, always chasing the next breakthrough. He had a beautiful wife, Lillian. He had 3 children: Judy, his 18-year-old daughter who was just coming into her own, Joel, his son, and the youngest, Debbie. They were the picture of mid-century success, and the house was their crown jewel. It was a sprawling estate over 5,000 square feet. It had a ballroom, a conservatory, a maid's quarters. It sat high on the hill, offering a view of the sprawling city lights below. It was a home designed for parties, for laughter, for a long and prosperous future. But facades are deceptive. The thicker the walls, the easier it is to hide what is happening inside. By the winter of 1959, the foundation of Harold Perelson's life was cracking. The money was there, but it was slipping away. Harold had poured his fortune into his inventions, a motorized syringe, a special medical mount, but the patents weren't paying off. He was sinking, and then there was the accident. The family had survived a severe car crash some time before. Friends and neighbors began to whisper that Harold wasn't the same after the wreck. The sharp, precise doctor had become distant. His eyes, usually focused on the details of medicine, began to stare off into the middle distance. He began to read, but he wasn't reading medical journals. He became obsessed with Dante's The Divine Comedy. He read about the circles of hell. He read about the punishments of the damned. He talked to his neighbors about the fragility of life, about the dark paths of the soul. The man of science was being consumed by philosophy and shadow. The house on Glendower Place, once a sanctuary, was becoming a pressure cooker. The air inside grew heavy. The silence grew louder. And as December arrived, bringing with it the cool California winter, the Perelson family prepared for Christmas. They set up the tree in the living room. It was a large, beautiful tree, dusted with artificial snow, adorned with glass ornaments. They wrapped the presents. Boxes for Judy, for Joel, for Debbie. Bright reds and greens, ribbons tied with care. They placed them under the tree, waiting for a morning that would never come. December 6, 1959. The day likely passed like any other. The sun went down. The lights of Los Angeles flickered on in the valley below, a sea of electric stars. The family ate dinner. They said goodnight. They went to their separate rooms. The house fell asleep. Can you imagine the silence of a house that size at 4 a.m.? The way the floorboards settle? The way the wind moves through the canyons outside? It is a heavy silence. A silence that presses against your ears. At 4:30 in the morning, Dr. Perelson woke up. We will never know exactly what he was thinking. We will never know if he was crying or if his face was completely blank. We only know what he did. He did not go to the kitchen for a glass of water. He did not go to his study to work on his patents. He went to his tool bench, and he picked up a hammer, a ball-peen hammer, heavy, cold iron, a tool meant for shaping metal. He walked back to the master bedroom. His wife Lillian was asleep. She was in the place where she should have been safest, her own bed next to her husband. He struck. The violence was immediate and catastrophic. Lillian never woke up. She never had the chance to ask why. She never had the chance to scream. The doctor, the man who had sworn an oath to save lives, ended the life of the woman he loved with a single brutal act. But the silence of the house was not broken yet. Harold turned. He walked out of the master bedroom, the hammer hanging from his hand. He walked down the hallway. The carpet muffled his footsteps. He passed the bathroom. He stopped at the door of his eldest daughter, Judy. Judy was 18. She was asleep, dreaming the dreams of a teenager with her whole life ahead of her. Harold raised the hammer again, but this time, something intervened. Perhaps it was the darkness. Perhaps it was hesitation. When he swung, the blow missed its mark. It struck a glancing blow. Judy woke up, and then the silence was shattered. A scream of pure primal terror tore through the house on Glendower Place. "Don't kill me," she screamed. "Dad, don't kill me." The struggle was chaotic. Judy, fueled by adrenaline, fought back against her father. She managed to escape the room. She ran into the hallway. She ran to her parents' room, perhaps looking for her mother, only to find the carnage that had been left behind. She ran. She ran out of the front door, into the cool night air, screaming for help. She banged on the neighbor's door, desperate, bloodied, begging for someone to save them. Inside the house, the younger children, Joel and Debbie, woke up. The noise, the screaming, the chaos, it pulled them from their beds. They stepped out into the hallway, and there they saw him, their father. He was standing there. He was covered in blood. He was holding the hammer. Imagine being a child. Imagine seeing the person who is supposed to protect you, the person who is the center of your world, standing there like a monster. But Harold didn't attack them. He looked at his children. And in a voice that was terrifyingly calm, a voice that sounded like it belonged to a different man, he spoke. He said, "Go back to bed. This is a nightmare. This is a nightmare." He didn't scream. He didn't chase them. He simply told them to go back to sleep, as if he could command reality to reset. As if they just closed their eyes, the blood would disappear, and the morning would bring pancakes and cartoons. The children ran. They fled the house, following their sister. The sirens were coming now. The wail of police cars winding up the hill, getting louder and louder. Harold Perelson knew it was over. The debt, the patents, the failure, the madness. It was all finished. He walked into the bathroom. He didn't try to run. He didn't try to hide the hammer. He mixed a cocktail of drugs, Nembutal and acid. He swallowed them. He lay down. And by the time the police kicked open the heavy oak doors of 2475 Glendower Place, the doctor was dead. The investigation was short. It was a murder-suicide. A tragedy, yes, but open and shut. The bodies were removed. The crime scene was photographed. The yellow tape was eventually taken down. And this is where the story usually ends. In 99% of cases, this is where the house moves on. The estate is sold. A new family buys it. They hire contractors. They rip up the carpet. They paint over the walls. They bring in sage to burn away the bad spirits. They fill the rooms with new furniture, new laughter, new memories. The tragedy becomes a footnote, a story told at dinner parties, but the house lives on. But 2475 Glendower Place refused to move on. A year after the murders, the house was sold at a probate auction. It was bought by a couple, Emily and Julian Enriquez. They bought the contents of the house as well, the furniture, the clothes, the books, the Christmas decorations. But then, they did something inexplicable. They didn't move in. They drove up to the house. They locked the doors. And they left. They didn't rent it out. They didn't renovate it. They didn't sell it for a profit. They simply kept it for the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. The house sat empty, but it wasn't just empty. It was a time capsule, because the Enriquez family hadn't cleared out the Perelson's belongings. Inside that house, it was still 1959. Neighbors who lived on the street for decades watched the house decay. They saw the paint peel. They saw the weeds grow through the cracks in the driveway. And the brave ones, the curious ones, would walk up to the windows at night and shine a flashlight inside. And what they saw terrified them more than any ghost. They saw the 1959 television set, sitting in the living room, waiting for a broadcast that would never come. They saw the furniture, draped in a thick layer of dust, exactly where it had been on the night of the murder. And they saw the Christmas tree. For decades, the Christmas presents sat under that tree, the paper fading, the ribbons collecting dust. Gifts from a father who became a murderer, for children who would never open them. Why? Why would the new owners leave it like that? Why buy a mansion in one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Los Angeles and let it rot? Emily and Julian Enriquez never explained. When asked, they simply said they used it for storage. But neighbors noticed that they rarely visited. And when they did, they didn't stay long. Did they feel it? Did they walk through the front door and feel the weight of the air? Did they feel the eyes of Dr. Perelson watching them from the shadows? The house became a local legend. It became a rite of passage for teenagers in Los Angeles. The murder house. They would dare each other to run up the driveway and touch the front door. Stories began to grow as they always do. People claimed that on the anniversary of the murders, December 6th, you could hear the sound of a hammer striking the walls. Thud, thud, thud. Others claimed that the burglar alarm would go off in the middle of the night. It would scream into the canyon, waking up the entire neighborhood. The police would arrive, guns drawn, only to find the house locked, secure, and empty. No power, no electricity. Just a silent house screaming in the dark. For 50 years, the house stood as a mausoleum, a monument to a moment of madness. It was a scar on the hill that refused to heal. It wasn't until 2016, after the death of the owners, that the house was finally emptied. Construction crews arrived. Dumpsters were filled. Imagine that job. Imagine being the worker who has to carry out a Christmas present wrapped in 1959. Imagine picking up the doctor's medical books. Imagine stripping the carpet where Lillian Perelson took her last breath. They gutted it. They stripped it down to the studs. They removed the soul of the house and threw it into a landfill. Today, if you go to Glendower Place, the house looks different. We wonder if the new owners sleep soundly. We wonder if, at 4:30 in the morning, when the wind dies down and the city is quiet, we wonder if they hear footsteps in the hallway. We wonder if they ever wake up, look at the shadows in the corner of the room, and hear a calm, terrifying voice whisper, "Go back to bed. This is a nightmare."